Hello there, and welcome to Wild Human Stories. My name is Lena, and I will be narrating your story today.
The shadow of Teyla stretched across the metallic floor of the human's private quarters, her indigo skin shimmering like deep water in the dim amber light. She moved with a lethal grace, her monomolecular blade held in a reverse grip that felt like an extension of her own arm. Her mission was clear: eliminate Asher, the human engineer whose projects were tipping the balance of power in the sector. She found him in the kitchen. He wasn't armed. He wasn't wearing armor. He stood over a small stove, the rhythmic sound of a knife hitting a wooden board the only noise in the room. "I have been waiting for you," Asher said. He didn't turn around. He continued to chop a bright red vegetable with a focus that seemed almost meditative. Teyla froze, her muscles coiling as she prepared to lung. She had been trained by the killers of the hegemony, yet this man's lack of alarm felt like a trap. "You should be begging for your life," she whispered. The words felt heavy in the air. Asher stopped his work and finally turned. He was taller than she expected, his frame lean but packed with functional muscle. His hair was a dark, messy crop, and his eyes held a level of calm that insulted her professionalism. "I'm sure you're very good at what you do," he said. He picked up a second bowl from the counter and held it out toward her. The steam rising from the pot behind him smelled of salt, fire, and something sweet that she couldn't name. It hit her reptilian brain, triggering a hunger she had been suppressing for weeks. "Sit down, Teyla," he said. The mention of her name caused her to flinch, her silver eyes widening in the low light. She didn't move toward the chair, but the blade in her hand lowered by a fraction. The scent of the food was an assault on her senses, far more effective than any blaster fire. It smelled of home, yet it was entirely alien. Asher set the bowl on the table and pushed it toward the empty seat opposite him. He then sat down and began to eat his own portion with a steady, unhurried pace. "How do you know who I am?" she asked. Her voice was a low rasp, thick with the tension of a predator who had found herself in a cage she didn't recognize. Asher swallowed a mouthful of the stew and looked at her. He didn't look at her like a target. He looked at her as if she were the most interesting thing he had ever seen. "The hegemony doesn't send amateurs," he said. He gestured to the bowl again. Teyla felt her resolve crumbling under the weight of her physical exhaustion. She had been tracking him for days without sleep. She took a step forward, her hand still tight on the hilt of her blade, and sat. She took a small spoonful of the mixture. The flavor exploded across her tongue, a complex blend of spices that warmed her from the inside out. It was a caloric density she had never experienced, designed for a species that refused to accept the limitations of their biology. "Why are you sharing this with me?" she asked. She took another bite, larger this time. The warmth of the food seemed to melt the ice in her veins. "Because no one should die on an empty stomach," he said. Asher watched her eat, his gaze lingering on the way her throat moved as she swallowed. There was a raw, primal energy between them that had nothing to do with the mission. He reached across the table, his calloused fingers grazing the back of her hand. Teyla didn't pull away. The contact sent a jolt of electricity through her indigo skin, a sensation so intense it made her breath hitch. It was the first time she had been touched without the intent of violence. "You are supposed to be a monster," she said. She looked down at his hand, then up into his brown eyes. They were filled with an empathy that felt dangerous. It was the human secret, the ability to project warmth into a cold universe. "Maybe I am," he said, "but I'm a monster who knows how to season a steak." He smiled, and the expression transformed his face, making him look younger and far more vulnerable. Teyla felt a strange ache in her chest. She had been sent to kill a man, but she was finding a soul instead. She set her blade on the table. It was a silent surrender, not to his strength, but to his kindness. "My handlers will not be happy," she said. The reality of her situation began to settle in. She had failed the mission the moment she tasted his salt. "They are already on their way, aren't they?" he asked. Asher didn't sound surprised. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes scanning the room as if he were already calculating their escape. "They don't trust anyone to finish the job alone," she said. The air in the room suddenly grew heavy as the station's proximity alarms began to wail. Teyla was on her feet in an instant, her blade back in her hand. Asher didn't panic. He stood up and walked over to a heavy metal locker in the corner of the kitchen. He pulled out a device that looked like a modified welding torch, but the way he handled it suggested it was something much more lethal. "Who is leading the retrieval team?" he asked. He started tapping commands into a wall console, his fingers moving with a speed that spoke of a deep connection to the machine. "Teyla's," she said. Her voice carried a note of genuine fear. Teyla's was a human defector who had risen through the ranks of the hegemony by being more ruthless than any alien. He didn't believe in meals or mercy. He believed in results. "I know him," Asher said. "He used to be my commanding officer before he decided he liked the view from the other side." The revelation hit Teyla like a physical blow. This wasn't just a political assassination. It was a personal vendetta. The man who had sent her to kill Asher was his former mentor. "He will burn the station to get to you," she said. She moved toward the door, her senses heightened by the adrenaline. "Then we better make sure he has nothing to burn," Asher said. He looked at her, his expression hardening. The gentle cook was gone, replaced by the man who had engineered survival on a dozen hostile worlds. "Are you with me, Teyla?" he asked. "I am," she said. The decision was made. She wasn't an assassin anymore. She was a partner. The first wave of Teyla's drones reached the outer hull with a deafening screech of tearing metal. They were small, insected machines designed to swarm and disable targets with non-lethal shocks before the recovery team moved in. Teyla moved like a blur of indigo light, her blade slicing through the composite carapaces of the drones before they could even calibrate their sensors. She was a master of the physical realm, but Asher was the master of the unseen. "Get down," he shouted. He slammed a heavy copper cable into a junction box on the wall. A massive pulse of electromagnetic energy rippled through the room. It didn't just stop the drones. It caused them to internalize their own power supplies, turning them into small, sparking husks. The lights in the kitchen flickered and died, leaving them in the dim glow of the emergency strobes. "That won't stop Teyla's," she said. She stood over the wreckage of a dozen machines, her chest heaving. The heat in the room was rising, the station's life support systems struggling to compensate for the damage. "It wasn't meant to stop him," Asher said. "It was meant to buy us time to get to the hangar." He reached out and grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the ventilation shaft he knew she had used to enter. His grip was firm, radiating a confidence that Teyla found intoxicating. Humans were supposedly weak, yet this man was walking into a firestorm with nothing but a wrench and a plan. "You are insane," she said. She followed him into the narrow crawl space, the proximity of his body sending fresh waves of heat through her. "It's a human trait," he said. "We call it optimism." They moved through the bowels of the station, the sounds of combat echoing through the vents. Teyla's men were efficient, but they were fighting a man who had built the very walls they were trying to navigate. Asher led them to a maintenance sublevel that shouldn't have existed on any official map. It was filled with prototype equipment and half-finished projects. He stopped at a heavy reinforced door and punched in a long sequence. "In here," he said. The door slid open to reveal a small, cramped bunker. It was filled with the smell of recycled air and old grease. Teyla pushed him inside and slammed the door shut, locking it from the inside. They were safe for the moment, but the tension in the small space was reaching a breaking point. She turned to face him, her silver eyes glowing in the dark. "Why didn't you kill me when you had the chance?" she asked. She pressed him against the door, her hands flat against his chest. She could feel the rapid thrum of his heart beneath his shirt. It was a frantic, living rhythm that called to her own. "I told you," he said. His voice was a low growl now, his hands coming up to rest on her hips. "You looked hungry." "You are a liar," she whispered. She leaned in, her lips inches from his. The air between them was thick with the scent of his sweat and the lingering spice of the meal. "You wanted me to stay." "I did," he said. He didn't wait for her to move. He closed the gap, his mouth crashing against hers with a desperation that shattered the last of her defenses. The kiss was a collision of two different worlds. Teyla's mouth was cool, tasting of the alien fruits she favored, while Asher was all fire and grit. He tasted of the earth and the sun, a combination that made her head spin. She wrapped her legs around his waist, pulling him deeper into the contact. His hands were everywhere, exploring the curves of her indigo skin with a reverence that made her feel like something sacred. She had been used as a tool for so long that the feeling of being desired for her own sake was overwhelming. "Asher," she gasped. She pulled back just enough to look at him. His face was flushed, his brown eyes dark with a hunger that had nothing to do with food. He ran a thumb over her bottom lip, his touch light as a feather. "I've wanted to do that since you stepped into the light," he said. He leaned down and buried his face in the crook of her neck, his breath hot against her scales. Teyla arched her back, a soft moan escaping her throat. The physical sensations were more intense than anything she had ever known. Her species was cold by nature, but the heat radiating from him was changing her, softening the edges of her warrior's heart. "They will find us," she whispered. Even as she spoke, she was unbuttoning his shirt, her fingers trembling with a need she couldn't control. "Let them try," he said. He lifted her up, setting her down on a workbench covered in blueprints. He pushed aside a pile of tools, his focus entirely on the woman in front of him. "Right now, there is only us," he said. The intimacy that followed was a frantic, beautiful chaos. Asher moved with a strength that surprised her, his body a solid weight against hers. He explored every inch of her indigo skin, his mouth leaving trails of heat that made her pulse race. Teyla responded with a primal intensity, her nails digging into his shoulders as they moved together in the cramped, dark space. It wasn't just a physical act, it was a defiance of everything that had brought them to this point. They were two enemies becoming one, a human and an alien forging a bond in the heart of a dying station. "Stay with me," she whispered into his ear. Her voice was broken, stripped of its assassin's edge. Asher pulled back and looked at her, his expression one of fierce devotion. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. He kissed her again, slower this time, a promise in every movement of his lips. The sounds of the station's destruction seemed far away, muffled by the intensity of their connection. For a brief moment, the galaxy was small enough to fit inside this bunker. They were no longer an engineer and an assassin. They were just two beings who had found something worth living for in the middle of a war. "We have to move," he said finally. He pulled away, his chest heaving as he reached for his discarded shirt. The alarms were getting louder, a signal that the station's core was nearing critical failure. "Silas is in the hangar," Teyla said. She stood up, adjusting her gear with the practiced movements of a soldier. The softness of the previous moments was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. "Then that's where we go," Asher said. They reached the hangar just as Silas was preparing to board his personal transport. He was a man of sharp angles and cold eyes, dressed in the high-collared black uniform of the hegemony. He turned when they entered, a slow, cruel smile spreading across his face as he saw Asher and Teyla standing together. "I see the human has a talent for more than just terraforming," Silas said. His voice was smooth, like oil on water. He gestured to the squad of armored guards surrounding him. Teyla stepped in front of Asher, her blade humming as she activated its power cell. "He is under my protection," she said. Her indigo skin seemed to glow with an inner light, her silver eyes fixed on her former master. "You were sent to kill him, Teyla," Silas said. "Not to fall in love with him. It's a pathetic human weakness." He raised his hand, and his guards leveled their rifles. Asher stepped out from behind Teyla, holding a small, nondescript remote. "It's not a weakness, Silas," Asher said. "It's an advantage. You see, when you love something, you get very creative about how to keep it." He pressed a button on the remote. A series of magnetic clamps on the hangar ceiling released, dropping several tons of heavy equipment directly onto the guard squad. The floor shook with the impact, and the room was suddenly filled with smoke and the sound of shouting. "Now," Asher yelled. Teyla didn't need a second invitation. She leaped over the wreckage, her blade a silver arc that found the gaps in the guard's armor with terrifying accuracy. She was a whirlwind of violence, fueled by the need to protect the man who had shown her mercy. Silas tried to reach for his sidearm, but Asher was faster. He tackled the older man, the two of them crashing into a stack of crates. Asher didn't use a weapon. He used his hands, the rough, calloused hands of a builder, to subdue the man who only knew how to destroy. "It's over, Silas," Asher said. He pinned the man to the floor, his eyes burning with a righteous fury. Teyla stood over the fallen guards, her blade dripping with alien blood. She looked at Asher, and for a moment they were the only two people in the universe. "The escape pod is ready," she said. She pointed to a small craft docked in the corner of the hangar. Asher let go of Silas and stood up, his gaze never leaving hers. "Let's get out of here," he said. They launched just as the station began to tear itself apart. From the cockpit of the small pod, they watched the outpost bloom into a flower of fire against the blackness of space. Teyla sat in the pilot's seat, her hands steady on the controls, while Asher sat behind her, his hand resting on her shoulder. The silence in the cabin was a heavy, physical thing, filled with the weight of everything they had lost and everything they had found. "Where will we go?" she asked. She looked at the star charts glowing on the console. They were fugitives now, hunted by the hegemony and the remnants of Silas' organization. "There's a small moon in the Zev system," Asher said. "It's not much to look at, but the soil is good. We can start something there." He leaned forward and kissed the side of her neck, his lips a warm reminder of the bond they had forged in the dark. "A new world?" she asked. A slow smile began to form on her face. It was a human expression, but it looked beautiful on her. "A new world," he said. "And this time, we'll make sure there's enough food for everyone." Teyla reached back and took his hand, her indigo fingers intertwining with his. They had started the day as hunter and prey, but they were ending it as the architects of a future neither could have imagined. In the vast, cold expanse of the galaxy, they had found the one thing that was truly human, the courage to share a meal with an enemy and turn it into a life. "I think I'd like that," she said. The pod accelerated into the stars, leaving the fire behind as they moved toward a horizon that belonged only to them.